There are two kinds of voter fraud in America, I would contend. One is real and one that is fake. The real one is the government systematically defrauding Americans, largely Black, Latino, and other minority voters, out of their right as citizens to vote. You think that language is too strong? Well, remember when the New York City Board of Elections purged over 100,000 voters from their rolls in Brooklyn, a very liberal area, many of them Asian American and Latino voters? Outside of Bernie Sanders' supporter circles, a lot of people don't realize that in a liberal state like New York. The media doesn't talk about it, but I would frame that amongst many other instances as the government defrauding all of those Americans out of their opportunity to vote. And the Supreme Court just paved the way for more of that to happen, which I will get to in a bit. But the voter fraud that the government truly decides to focus on is specific instances of targeting people trying to vote who can't. And those people are largely minorities. A judge who sentenced a Texas woman to 5 years in prison for voting illegally because she was a felon turned down on Monday the woman's bid for a new trial. Crystal Mason, 43, was convicted of illegal voting in a one-day trial held March 28th before Judge Ruben Gonzalez, a state district court judge, who sentenced her that day to 5 years in prison. She has been free on bond pending appeal. Ms. Mason, who was sentenced to 60 months in jail for tax fraud and was released in early 2016, has said that she didn't know that she wasn't allowed to vote in that year's presidential election. She cast a provisional ballot at her local church after being told that her name could not be found on the rolls. I don't even have time to get into how archaic the felon disenfranchisement is and how it is yet another racist voting policy, but know that that's the case, okay? This woman was convicted of tax fraud, something Wall Street bankers do and might even get convicted of, but are forgiven in like 30 seconds and sometimes get back to their cushy Wall Street jobs, by the way. And she voted because she didn't know that she couldn't. Voter laws on felons vary state to state and aren't very clear. To me, it's an obvious misunderstanding, and she gets 5 years in prison. She tries to get a new trial because, wow, that sentence is clearly ridiculous. Nope, no new trial. She's a Black person, so she isn't allowed to make a mistake. She gets 5 years for the ungodly crime of trying to have a say in her own government and do her civic duty. And the judge that initially handed down that 5-year sentence, a Rick Perry appointee, a Republican. Shocker, I know. 2 months ago, a petition was started online to have all charges against Ms. Mason, who is Black, thrown out. In the petition, her photo is placed next to a photo of Terry Lynn Rote, a white woman who was convicted of voter fraud in Iowa for trying to vote for President Trump twice. Ms. Rote was sentenced to 2 years probation and a $750 fine. The petition has over 38,000 signatures. Okay, I get it. Voter laws vary state to state, so that woman's sentence in Iowa may be different based on the way Iowa and Texas do things. But does anyone really think that? This woman, Terry Rote, she actually did something knowingly wrong. There's no way that she could argue that she didn't know that voting twice was wrong. And I think the punishment she received fits the crime mostly. It's really not a huge deal, but when you compare it to what happened to Crystal Mason, that's when it's unbelievably angering. We have two different justice systems in this country. People often say that, but actually maybe we have three. One for rich people, one for white people, and then one for Black and Latina and other minority people. Because I'm sure Terry Rote isn't rich, but she gets the benefit of the doubt. Look, I'm sure it was a mistake, Terry. Just don't vote twice again. But Crystal, no benefit of the doubt. She's an illegal voter. Let's throw the entire book at her. So while Crystal's case was more specific to her having a felony conviction in the past, there are many more ways that the government is trying to disenfranchise millions of Americans and make sure that only a certain class of people are able to vote. There are voter ID laws, which I've talked about extensively before on this channel before. But the Supreme Court just earlier this week ensured that what I said happened in Brooklyn could happen countrywide. The Supreme Court on Monday ruled that Ohio's method of removing names from its voter rolls does not violate federal law. The decision was 5-4. Monday's ruling concerning the battleground state comes as the country gears up for midterm elections this fall. At least 6 other states have similar laws, and the ruling could embolden others to follow suit and enact what critics say are aggressive purges of voter rolls. Ohio law allows the state to send address confirmation notices to voters who have not engaged in voter activity for 2 years. If a voter returns the notice through prepaid mail or responds online, the information is updated. If the notice is ignored and the voter fails to update a registration over the next 4 years, the registration is canceled. Liz Kennedy, the Senior Director of Democracy and Government Reform at the Center for American Progress, says this: "The Supreme Court has just given a stamp of approval to voter suppression. Ohio's system of purging voters that choose not to participate in some elections unfairly silences hundreds of thousands of voters in the state, especially people of color and the homeless." Dale Ho, Director of Voting Rights Project at the American Civil Liberties Union, said the vast majority of other states find ways to make sure voter lists are up to date by using tax records or return mail or Department of Motor Vehicles change of address forms to determine whether someone may have moved. That's because those states aren't aggressively trying to purge people of lower socioeconomic status off of their voter rolls. People who maybe aren't in a set address or who are working 3 jobs and don't have the time or resources to be keeping up with this stuff to the T, but who want to express their voting rights. It's targeted at poor and minority voters, and the disparity between the sentencing of Terry Lynn Rote and Crystal Mason is a microcosmic example of the way our government is targeting those voters. We should be trying to bring more people into the voting process in a democracy, not less. And this Ohio issue specifically was brought forth because a man was removed from the voter rolls in 2009 and 2010 because he wasn't active in those years. The year before was the year Obama first got elected, and a lot of black voters registered for that election. All of these voter disenfranchisement laws have racial significance and meanings behind them. They are designed to keep the status quo in place and to enable conservatives to have more power. They're instituted by shameless and aggressive conservatives who are desperate to retain that power. And it's a virus that has infected our voter system. Conservatives like to scream from the rooftops that there is so much voter fraud when study after study after study has shown that it is not a real problem. From the voter side, there were just 4 instances of documented voter fraud during the 2016 presidential election, one of them being Terry Lynn Rote, and 3 of them, including her, voted for Trump. This is a false boogeyman meant to perpetuate racial injustices, and it allows for the government to whittle our democracy down to a nub for them to remain in power, starting by disenfranchising more and more and more people who are poor or minorities in the country.